Welcome to the How to Use the NASA Recover Post-Wildfire Decision Support System webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel following this presentation. The itinerary for the day is, well, we've pretty much taken care of our introductions and going to move into this presentation using PowerPoint, and then about 20 minutes, 25 minutes later, I'll give a demonstration of how to use the Recover web maps, the decision support system itself. We'll have time for questions and answers. You can feel free to enter those into the chat box at any time, and either myself or actually I have some of my staff here that will be addressing those chat questions as they come up. And that doesn't have to be limited, by the way, to just 5 minutes. And then anyway, we will planning to turn this over to a hands-on exercise, and we should be wrapping up by 2:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Okay, I'd like to begin by giving a little, I'll call it a historical context behind what we do here at Idaho State University's GIS Training and Research Center. This facility has existed for 21 years, and since that time, the mission of the GIS Center really hasn't changed. It is to facilitate sound decision-making using geospatial technologies. So the research that we do here is very, very applied type of research. We have obviously focused on the Intermountain West. That's where we are, that's where we live, but we have done some additional studies in other parts of the world. Wildfire has obviously made it very obvious that it is a large driver of land cover change, and that was really where we started doing our research, was looking at land cover change. What is changing on the landscape? What are the drivers of this change? Wildfire is not the only significant agent of land cover change. There's also invasive plants, herbivory, especially by livestock. Some of these changes are driving things toward a better rangeland ecosystem or better ecosystem. Others degrade it, sometimes temporarily, sometimes long-term, as you are probably all aware. And of course, we have those interactive effects between wildfire, grazing, invasive weeds, and all that. But of course, we're focusing now on wildfires. Wildfires are not only predicted to increase in frequency and size over time, but fires are indeed actually increasing in frequency and average size. Now this graph, if you attended the webinar that we did about the same time last year, you just maybe have been looking at some literature, you've probably seen something very, very similar to this. We have, and we maintain here as part of the NASA Recover project, the Historic Wildfires database. And that database is as comprehensive as we can possibly make it. And it runs roughly, well, it runs from 1950 now through 2018, as the wildfires in 2018 are now considered history. And if we look at the trend line of those changes in wildfire frequency, this is just a graph of wildfire frequency, so a flat count of documented wildfires. We see that trend line is indeed increasing. And the R² value that describes that increase in fire frequency is actually a pretty strong correlation between time and fire frequency, and that is an R², as you can see, of 0.73. The trend line, by the way, is not a linear trend line. The line of best fit is an exponential line, and that's kind of interesting, if you want to call it, maybe kind of scary at the same time. GIS and wildfire. So Recover was designed as a post-wildfire decision support system to help you, the land manager, answer questions about things like reseeding. Where should the semi-arid savanna or grassland ecosystem be reseeded? What about mulch, straw mulch, wood mulch? What about the potential for a debris flow, landslides, erosion in the future? And also, Recover can be used and was designed to be used for long-term monitoring following a wildfire. We do that, as you'll see, for you to help you using products from MODIS, satellite imagery. We can also do some things for you using Landsat. Now, there's other questions as well that this system can be used to help you answer and address. These are just the primary purposes for what Recover was first designed to do. And in actuality, Recover has started to be used. Normally, wildfires are burning, and that's when folks start using Recover, and then they continue using it once the fire's contained while they're writing their rehab plans, and so on and so forth. So for all these type of questions that we're looking at here, geospatial data are necessary to affect a well-informed decision. But that's not the only piece of information that we want, that you might want. And certainly this data being provided to you through Recover is going to enhance your field observations, your field sampling, and those sort of things. And it's certainly never intended to replace those sort of things. That's something we can never move away from, is doing good field work. Megafires. Now that's a term I'm sure you've all heard of before, probably even more than I have heard of it. Recover and its geospatial data complements field observations, as I already said, and it assists in identifying areas to be sampled in the field. That becomes more important as we get into those megafires. That is, by our definition and by most folks' definition, fires that burn 100,000 or more acres. So in that sort of situation, you know, even a large team is going to have a hard time really visiting that large fire. However, Recover and the geospatial data that we provide can be used to direct those field observations. Maybe you've got a place that has a prediction of a relatively high likelihood of post-fire debris flow. Maybe it's also in an area of high fire severity and steep slopes, or just a multitude of different variables come into play at one location and another. Those might be places that you certainly do want to visit in the field, and you may have to not visit other points in the field just because of time. Now, under this changing fire regime of more fires and more very large fires, I think it's been considered fairly unreasonable to expect that we can manage wildfires without utilizing GIS and satellite remote sensing. Recover's capability, number one, it's designed and delivers data, geospatial data, and reports very rapidly. Normally, within 5 minutes, we have a finished product ready for you to make use of. There is 26 what we call base layers, and those are a suite of layers that you told me about. It wasn't things that we said, well, here we're going to give you this wonderful stuff and you're going to love it. Not at all. What we did when we were designing this a number of years ago, and still today, we ask you, what do you want? And people will say, hey, why don't you add this? Why don't you add X? Why don't you add Y? Whatever it happens to be. And so Recover has evolved over time, and now we have 26 of those layers that we've heard from you that this is what you'd like to see. So that's what you're getting with the Recover system. It's accessed via a web browser. That's how we're going to do it today, with a username and password. Well, the exercise we're doing today does not require a username and password because maybe not all of you have it, or maybe some of you have misplaced it or whatever. If that's the case, you need a username and password to get into the real active fires, those sort of things. Then just let me know, my email's coming up here in a little bit, and we'll be very happy to send you the credentials to fully access the Recover system. You can download data, every piece of data that you look at on the screen of a Recover Decision Support System site can be downloaded in a single click. It's a zip file, and it'll contain the metadata, the GIS data, all the reports in PDF format, and so on. So if you wanted to do some even more sophisticated stuff or have some GIS specialists in your office do things for you, you have access to all that data very, very easily. And as I already alluded to, there's numerous reports at your fingertips, simply available in PDF format. This is a list of those 26 base layers. And where do we get this stuff? Well, we get all this data from authoritative sources. You'll see there a lot of it comes from USGS. A lot of it essentially comes from you, the BLM, the U.S. Forest Service, NRCS, et cetera, et cetera. Tremendous amount of data. We have wall-to-wall coverage, seamless coverage across 11 Western states. And each of these layers is reviewed annually, normally from about November or December through till now. We are reviewing all these data sets and updating data sets as necessary. And we are pretty much ready for you and for the fire year coming up with a nice set of updated and current data. Obviously, not all the data changes every year, as the elevation from the National Elevation Data Set really isn't changing that much. I mean, there's some LiDAR being collected, but the NED product, 10-meter NED product that we're serving is not changing. The menu, what the programmers like to call the hamburger up in the upper right corner, is the place where you'll get those reports. There's a general summary, acres burned per agency within a fire perimeter. You'll see a report from the ecosystem resilience and resistance layer, so you'll have both GIS data on that as well as a report. A DNVR report on fire severity or fire-affected vegetation. Long-term trend on NDVI, that's that product from Modus I was alluding to earlier. Detailed soils reports and a debris flow information as well, metadata and some descriptions on how to interpret and utilize the debris flow. Now, not all of those reports will be available or present for every single fire. Some of those things are what we call additional data requests. So if a person would like to have a debris flow model generated, we will submit that request on your behalf to the USGS Landslide Hazards Program. And as they produce those things for you, I'm kept in the loop as the debris flow model is completed. We download it and we ingest it into Recover so you can look at it with all those other 26 layers. And you can also view the metadata and descriptive information that comes along with that debris flow. And there's a couple of those layers that you're looking at there that are considered additional data requests. And we can normally fulfill those very quickly, sometimes within a matter of days, sometimes a little bit longer if we have some trouble getting a hold of clear satellite imagery following the fire to do a fire severity or fire-affected vegetation. But at the same time, there's other organizations that are doing those same things, like the USGS, like the U.S. Forest Service's GTAC, and if we can find that data for you, we will use their data instead of us generating it for you. And we're all using the same algorithm anyway. It's all a DNVR type of product. Here's an example of one of the reports. This is a report from a DNVR, difference normalized burn ratio, fire severity layer. You'll see that this is broken down by the DNVR values, not classified as high, medium, low necessarily in that graph up on top, but then using the basic, the beginning or initial cut points of DNVR values you'll see a breakdown in percentage as well as acres in this table here based on severity. Now these, of course, are the default break lines of the DNBR values, and they may not be the final values. That's why, as we said earlier, Recover should not be used, and actually none of this data ever should be used as the final product without validation in the field, because these numbers and these lines might move over time, and probably most of the time they will in a specific fire. Another example of a report is from the summary of the ecological resilience and resistance layer. So how resistant or resilient to change is that fire area? This was a layer put together by the BLM and the NRCS a couple of years ago. We were asked to ingest it into Recover, and we're doing that. And here on this individual fire, things are broken down so that you can take a look kind of what you're dealing with as far as resilience of that landscape to a wildfire. So a place with high resilience, you can expect, that's the idea, expect that it will come back to pre-fire conditions or to a productive ecosystem without much of your intervention, if you want to call it that. The low resiliency areas are probably the most problematic. That's the way to interpret that. And of course, there's much more information available from the BLM and NRCS on this specific layer. Long-term monitoring, we maintain a library of MODIS data acquired every 6 days across the Western United States from 2001 until now, or a couple of days ago. And from 2001 through the end of 2018, all of that data becomes what we call the long-term average. And essentially, January 1st, let's say, through now, that is the current season, the current growing season. And what we'll do if a person wants to look at the long-term trend of NDVI or vegetation productivity for your fire area, you can simply request the long-term monitoring. You'll get geospatial data like we're looking at here that shows your fire area, your fire, and the MODIS data, trend data inside of it. You'll also get a report that shows this fire season in red, long-term trend in blue. The orange vertical line is the actual date of the fire. Date is given in Julian dates. And by the way, another part of this report helps you convert Julian date to actual date so you can make better sense of this thing. And that's one of the graphs that you get. And here is another, just two different ways of looking at kind of the same thing. In this case, we saw that the particular growing season during a fire, this particular fire, was quite a bit higher than the average. This has been normalized by the average. And then, of course, following the fire, that NDVI dropped off because the fire consumed all that vegetation. But this can be useful for you to look at a long-term trend. Can also be used to look forward as that area starts to recover over time. Going back into this menu, this is where you'll do your data downloads right here. And then you can utilize the NASA Whirlwind 3D visualization capabilities. Now that is a new capability we have added to Recover over the winter. It works really well. Very, very great way to do some data visualization. And you're going to get a chance to play with that and experiment with it today as part of our exercise. Well, how does it all work? Well, of course, you're going to have a fire. So a fire starts burning, there's some sort of ignition. And for many of you, you immediately go to work. You're gathering information, dealing with fire suppression and firefighting and all that. And that you're busy. I understand that. And normally what happens is a couple of days into it, a number of days into this fire, you might have a bit of a breather and you say, you know what, we're going to have to do a rehab plan on this particular fire. And I know that the name of the rehab plans are different amongst the Forest Service, between the Forest Service and the BLM and state agencies. That's why I simply am calling it a generic rehab plan. And then you might say, okay, I'm going to go out and do my self-service generator. Go out there and you walk through the generator. We'll see how this works here in just a minute. And when you click the submit button in the generator, our servers go to work producing a fire-specific or site-specific web application, a Recover DSS for your fire. Now, from the time that you click submit until the time that you receive an email that says your DSS site is ready is normally 5 minutes. And that, I hope, works very well for you, that we can turn things around so quickly. Recover, the process automation and our big servers are kind of the reason why I think that works so darn well. But we thought, hey, let's make this even faster. So we developed, again, over last year, we started implementing it actually during the 2018 fire year, and we call this the large fire trigger. So we're monitoring, our servers and our computers here are monitoring fires as they are entered into something like GeoMac. And so here we have this fire ignition, a disaster event occurs. Eventually, and usually in fairly short order, that data is entered into GeoMac and similar type of sites. What we'll then do is we'll acquire that fire perimeter layer, we'll download that, we'll then run it through generator, and within that same 5 minutes, we'll have a recovered DSS ready for you. Now, instead of you having to do this, and you certainly can do this, as I said earlier, that can take a number of days before you even get a chance to do it. We can knock out maybe 1 or 2 or 3 days because we're noticing it right here. It becomes a large fire and it triggers our system. And so we can oftentimes provide that data for you before you even ask. In fact, this even happened last year. I sent a large fire trigger DSS site to one of our users, our partners in the BLM, and that person emailed back in an hour or so, a couple hours, and said, hey, that's great. I was just about to ask you to prepare one of these DSS sites for you, which, by the way, we can do also. If you have a fire you want us to run through the recovered DSS for you, just send us a shapefile of that fire, and we will take it from there and get you the DSS URL back as fast as possible. So how do you create a fire DSS with generator if you want to do it all on your own? Well, we revised and revamped our dashboard. It's actually going to be going under some additional changes in the not too distant future. But this is what it looks like right now. Off on the left side, you'll see a list of all the different fires Recover has been deployed upon. And you can sort this by name, by state, by year, by acreage, whatever you want to make this all work. You can also simply find your fire, click on it here, and then launch the site. So 2 different ways that you can launch into a Recover site. But if you look right up here, there's a little server automation button. It looks kind of small on the screen here, but it's very visible. Just click it, and that then launches you into the generator. You'll log into the Recover generator with the same credentials that you would use to go into a recovered DSS site. And the first thing I tell people to do is to click here, which is simply going to show you a list of the fires that Recover has been working on most recently. You might find out, it's possible, oh, the fire that I want to generate has already been done, so don't bother. If you're the point of contact, though, almost certainly it won't have been already completed unless our large fire trigger has already picked up on it. But let's assume it hasn't been done, so then you're going to do a little 2-step process right here, starting with step 1. And this is where you upload, or actually you're going to open a fire perimeter shapefile that's on your computer. Real simple. Click on this button that says Load Local Shapefile. You'll open that up, or actually load up the zip file to recover, and it'll open it up and it'll display it to you. It'll zoom up to your fire and display it to you. This is kind of your assurance. Yes, I clicked on the right zip file. This is the fire I want to work on. Or maybe, you find out, oh shoot, that's the one from 2 days ago. Okay, fine. That's your chance to get it just right. And then once that's done, then step 1 is absolutely completed. Step 2, you're going to complete this form, give the fire a name. You don't have to give the word fire here. Just if the fire is called the widget fire, just type in widget. Then select your state from the drop-down list box. There's the 11 selections for the 11 states that we cover across the West. And then once again, you're going to upload that same file. You'll click on this upload file right here. And what this is doing, this is actually getting ready to upload it to our server. And so it's a little bit different than what you clicked on before. You can let us know that the fire is contained by checking that box right there. Check the fire if it's contained. And then you're going to identify the area of interest. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But let me draw your attention here to all these layers. You'll see that there are 26 of these layers. If, for whatever reason, you don't want one of these or 2 of these, whatever, you can turn them off. I don't think anyone has ever done that. So sometimes I'm wondering if we should even have this on here. But it's on there right now. And don't forget to put in your email address. That is the email that you're going to be emailed, contacted by our server, and later by me and my staff as we work together. Here is also where you can request that additional data. Maybe you want the DNBR, Fire-Affected Vegetation, put a check here. Maybe you want the debris flow model, check there. Or you want that MODIS-based pre-fire long-term vegetation monitoring. You can check all 3, check just 1, whatever it is that you need. Okay, then you're going to click Submit. But let's talk about this area of interest first. So you're going to see your fire perimeter. You're going to see this once you complete step 1. Okay, that's your fire perimeter that you just are getting ready to essentially submit to our server. And then if you click this area of interest rectangle polygon, you're just going to drag this thing out. Make it larger, obviously, than the fire itself, and as large as you need it, I suppose. And some folks are interested in making sure that this AOI contains or is large enough to contain the watersheds that are affected by this wildfire. And that's a very good approach. In fact, last year we wrote a special protocol to walk you through that process where you can delineate the watersheds based on this fire perimeter and then use that to help you identify the AOI. That protocol, written protocol for both ArcGIS ArcMap as well as ArcGIS Pro is available on our website, and I'd be happy to send that directly to anyone. So again, you could email me and ask for the watershed, let's call it something like the watershed delineation protocol. So once that's all done, then you'll see here I got a name for the fire. I called it name. This happened to burn in Utah. There's our AOI. Yes, we'll take all these layers. Your email at email.com. This is what it's going to pretty much look like. Then you'll click on the submit button. And literally in about 5 minutes, you're going to receive an email just like this. And this then would be the URL to your brand new Wildfire DSS. And this URL, by the way, will not change. So if this is an actively burning fire and maybe tomorrow you ask us to do a refresh because the fire perimeter has changed, or maybe 5 days later you have a final on the fire perimeter, that's fine. We will update that for you. We call it a refresh, but that URL will never change. That way, if you've got a team of people already using this DSS for a given fire, they don't have to be told, oh, there's a new URL, there's version 2, there's version 3, whatever. So that, I think, will help people out, and so far in the past it has. And then, of course, there's some additional information here to help you and your team make good use of Recover. And a little bit of a reminder, if you need refreshers, we're here to help you out. And as I say here, hey, it's not done once you click submit and you get your email. This simply begins a dialogue with the NASA Recover team, and we will work with you to assist you. We can request a debris flow model on your behalf. You can make those additional data requests later. If you started off and you said, no, I'm not going to request a DNBR or debris flow, but you change your mind later on because you say, oh, I guess I do need that. Great, just let us know and we'll get that going for you. We will calculate, create, or acquire that DNBR layer for you if you request that. And we'll also add your data. We've done this a lot in the past. We've worked with the Forest Service to bring in Survey 123 data, the field observation data. We did that for the Chetco Bar Fire in Oregon just a couple of years ago. We can bring in Collector for ArcGIS data. That is another easy thing to do. We can bring in UAS imagery. We brought that in with the Crystal Fire a number of years ago here in Idaho. And we last year brought in LiDAR data for the Woolsey Fire in California. And as I already mentioned, we can do as many refreshes of the system for you. Now, I am going to pause for just a minute or two. If you have a question, you can certainly feel free to unmute yourself or put your question into the chat line. I did want to also mention that Recover, in case you didn't notice the NASA meatball all over the place, NASA is the sponsor of the Recover DSS. There's myself as the principal investigator and a number of co-PIs, John Shanasi and Mark Carroll at Goddard Space Flight Center. All right, well, I'm going to move into our demo. I'm so familiar with our website, essentially where you would start, I suppose. So I oftentimes forget to even show people this part. But to find Recover, to find a bunch of this different stuff that you might be looking for, you'll simply navigate to giscenter.isu.edu. Okay, there's a question.
How do you decide what imagery to use to calculate the DNVR?
Okay, very good question. How are we deciding what imagery to use to calculate the DNVR? What we do is we will start monitoring both Landsat and Sentinel-2 collections. As soon as we get that request for a DNVR, we grab the pre-fire imagery as quickly as we can, and we process that satellite imagery into a pre-fire NVR. And then we start monitoring both Landsat acquisitions and Sentinel-2 acquisitions. And the first one that comes in with clear post-fire imagery is the one that we will typically use, and we'll pair it against its pre-fire imagery to then calculate your DNVR. So you're either going to get a DNVR from Sentinel-2, and that's going to be pre-fire, post-fire Sentinel-2, or you're going to get it from Landsat 8. We're not going to mix and match. We won't do pre-fire from Landsat and post-fire from Sentinel. That's just not right. So that's what we do with this request. And oftentimes we found that GTAC or something like that will maybe get it a little bit ahead of us, and so we'll happily use that data and ingest it into Recover for you. Okay, I'm going to come back here to this website, GIS Center's website, and Recover, of course, is research that we're doing here. We also obviously do training. So you'll click on research, and then one of our big active research projects, obviously, is NASA Recover, and this is the NASA Recover web page for the whole project. Feel free to visit this and check it out, all the different things, the objectives, what we're up to, overview of the project, and all the different results from tutorials and documents and presentations, just like this one, to details on the architecture of Recover and so on. This is also the launching point for our dashboard. You can click here. This is our dashboard coming up. And as I said, you can sort this by the name, you know, by the fire year, so on and so forth, by the acres of the fire if you're interested in just looking at that. And this, of course, is where you would launch into the generator. If I go back here now, no, there we go. This is what we're going to be using today. It is our tutorial that's been revised based on some changes that we have made since we wrote up our last tutorial. But right now, I'm going to use this as part of our demo. This is the URL, very similar to what you would get in the email that our servers will send to you. And it's launching. Now, normally, before you get here, you'll be greeted with a sign-in page. You won't see any of this sort of stuff. You'll see the sign-in page first. Oh, and I want to do one more thing to show you what you might see. I'm going to launch this new Incognito window, and it looks like you're being scary here or something like this. Let me just show you the method behind my madness. Here we go into research, back into recover. Now, these incognito windows are great if you're programming because you can see what other people are going to see the first time that they hit your site. So it's kind of great this way. And I'm going to click again on Learn Recover. Shows me this. And now I'm going to click this, and the computer is going to act as if I've never visited this before. Wham! Look at that. I get a big old black screen. I do see the hamburger menu out here. But I also see, and this is Chrome, by the way, and other browsers will look a little bit different, but it's going to say, hey, this thing, in some parts of Recover, use Flash behind the scenes. Just click it, tell it to allow it, and there you go. And it's all launching up. Okay, so I don't need to run this in the incognito window any longer. I don't know if the performance is really any different or not, but I'll close that up. And here we are once again at the splash screen of Recover. So it's a good idea to look this over. Feel free to look over the credits and then agree to this. And now you're in. And based on how this site was put together, you might see something just like this. This one automatically has the debris flow probability layer turned on. And again, this debris flow model was put together, was calculated by USGS Landslide Hazards Program and then ingested into Recover. So let's go real simple through this thing to help you make the best use of Recover as possible. So we'll start with just some navigational things. If you look right over here, there you have a navigation bar that normally, if your mouse isn't hovered over it, it will become very semi-transparent, kind of keeps it out of your way. When you want to use it, it brightens up to full color, and you can start making use of this thing. By default, the pan tool is turned on, and I'm just dragging this window around. If you accidentally move completely off of your fire and you don't even know where the fire went, just come back here and click the full extent, and it effectively comes right back to how it opened when you first launched this DSS. You can use this to incrementally pan to the left, pan to the right, pan up and pan down. This is sort of like your browser window to go back, except here we're going back and forth to previous extents. You can zoom in using this tool if you like. Or you can simply press and hold the Shift key on your keyboard and then drag a rectangle around the area that you want to zoom to, and away it goes. For me, that works out really well because it's the exact same technique that we use inside ArcGIS Pro. Zooming back out to the original extent. The next thing that we use quite a bit, that you'll end up using most likely quite a bit, is this layer list and legend, essentially a table of contents. By the way, on all of these boxes or windows, you can grab the tool or the window in the lower right corner, change its size however you want it. You might want to display it rather long like this, because that way you can open up and see all of the recover base layers. To look at the symbology that's being used, just expand the particular base layer. This one here is the roads. To turn on the roads, just like in a GIS software you might already be familiar with, like ArcMap or ArcPro, turn it on and off, and you'll see it responds quite quickly to you. And that works exactly the same for all of these layers. Here's our NDVI Departure. This is that Modus product we talked about. You can turn it on and off just like you do the base layers. The debris flow probability. Now there's lots of different layers of debris flow probability that's generated by the USGS Landslide Hazards Program, and you are given all of them and in this data download over here. By default, we display the debris flow prediction for a rainfall event of 24 millimeters per hour, so roughly a 1/4 inch an hour type of rainfall event. And that is the default that the USGS Landslide Hazard Program also displays on their website. So we've coordinated that with them. And lastly, here is the Fire-Affected Vegetation, DNVR, layer for this particular fire. It's not a Bark 4 product. That comes later, obviously, as you do your field work. And as you get a Bark 4 finished, if you want that displayed, brought in to recover, you can certainly point us to it and we'll get that displayed for you as well. Another tool that's used quite a bit in Recover is the Identify tool. So you might be looking at something like, oh, let's take a look at this ecosystem resilience and resistance layer. And maybe I'm wondering, what is all this stuff? I mean, I can see it here in the legend, but maybe you want to just, maybe you can't discern some sort of coloration here, or you don't see it. We can use the Identify tool to ask this GIS, what is this? I'm gonna turn on the Identify tool. And normally with all these tools, any of these tools that you're seeing up here, we're gonna take a little bit of time to set it up, and then we're gonna actually use it. So the Identify tool is asking as well, first of all, we could identify from all visible layers, but if you know that you want to query the ecosystem resilience and resistance layer, simply find it, select it, and that's about it. That's all you really need to do, and click. Okay, it tells us here that that spot was a place of high resilience to a wildfire or to a disturbance, really. And we see a little bit more than that. We see that this is the common name of this this area here is cool. Summers are moist, so on and so forth. And we can also use this tool to zoom in to make sure that that is what we clicked on, especially if you have a very complex layer. That can become very, very helpful. Another layer that I think is quite useful to you, or might be useful to you, is the Surgo soils. And you can display as many layers as you want, by the way. I'm just turning them off, on and off, so you can see what I'm trying to do here as easily as possible. Now here we have some Surgo soils. layers that have been completed. This is incomplete for much of the fire, unfortunately. And I can do the same thing. I can go back to my identify tool, set it up, as I said earlier. Oops, I scrolled past it. There it is. It is now set up, and then click. And what we see here is just some basic information. The area symbol is Utah 634, map unit symbol 391. But you'll also see that there is a URL here and a little link button URL here. Now, if I click on this, I know I was going to get this error message because of the color shown here. Already tells me that there's not an ecological or type report that's already been completed. No additional reports available. But I wanted to take a minute to show you that this does exist for a lot of areas across the western United States and kind of give you an idea of what you're going to see on those particular reports. So I'm going to minimize this for just a minute. There we go. I've got some links I've already set up in here. Same deal. Okay, this is the recover site for the Crystal Fire. This fire was about a 250,000 acre fire in 2006 in Idaho. There's some UAS data I was alluding to earlier. That's been brought into this one. But the one layer that I wanted to show you and how it works when the data is available, as any sort of GIS, it's very data driven. If you don't have the data there, you're not going to get much help out of GIS. Again, exact same tool. We're going to set this up. There's Surgo. And these brownish looking polygons have those reports available. I'm going to click here. And very similar to what we saw before, we get this report, map unit symbol 35. And now I'm going to click on the URL link from either here or the other place. And here is a report. Now, this report was actually put together by NRCS. And what we've done is we've generated all the available reports, ecological site reports, made them available. They're actually sitting on our server, and they are linked to the Recover system. So you'll immediately have access to all of these things as well, and you don't have to go digging into additional websites to get that information to you or to your team. So I wanted to take just a minute to show you that. Don't need that anymore. Okay. Back to our exercise fire demonstration. I wanted to show you how we can further work with this layer list. I can change the draw order here. Maybe what I want to do is I want to draw the fire-affected vegetation on top of the debris flow. For whatever reason, I can tell it to move it up. Okay. Now maybe what I want to do is I want to change the transparency of this layer. I can do that very easily. I'm going to go to about, try to get it about 50%. Roll that all up. And now what I'm able to do is kind of see through the fire-affected vegetation to the debris flow probability. And based on what layers you're using, this effect can be a little bit more pronounced or not. But you have that capability to change draw order, the transparency or opacity of those layers that are being drawn. Another way that you can look at data and the relationship between one data layer and another is through the use of the swipe tool. And I think this tool can be very handy as well. So we're going to go back over here to the swipe tool. That's the fourth tool almost in the center here. Again, once I click the tool, I want to set it up. The active layer, this is the one that we're going to peel away. So the layer I want to peel away is the one on top, and it is the fire-affected vegetation. I'm going to use a swipe tool. I like this tool. And now what I can do is I can peel it away and see what's underneath it. If I kind of zoom into some areas, that'll make it all the more useful, perhaps. And we see a place up in the near the top that has high likelihood of a debris flow, and we're seeing some relatively high fire-affected vegetation ratings up there as well, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit over here as well on this side. It can be a very handy tool to visualize the relationship of one layer to another, and so on and so forth. Kind of quick way of doing that sort of work. Another, and you'll be working with that tool in the exercise, so I'm kind of going over these tools relatively quickly to let you be familiar with those, and then you're going to get your chance to experiment with those tools and some hands-on experience with those tools in the hands-on exercise here in just a little bit. The draw tool is another one of our, I think, pretty handy tools that you can make use of. That's under the graphics tools, and you're going to get a chance to do that as part of the exercise. You can actually bookmark. So if this is a place that you want to look at again, you can write a bookmark to it. That bookmark is on your machine, not visible by a bunch of other folks, but it can be very handy for you to return to certain spots that you may want to investigate a little bit more closely. You can import data that's on your machine. Again, that's going to be displayed to you on your machine. You can import a shapefile. That works really well. If you want a large group of people to all have access to a certain file, then certainly work with us. We will ingest that data for you. Then everyone will be able to see it. And that works out oftentimes very well as well. You know, Recover can be used a lot for what we call cross-organizational collaboration. You could set up a webinar just like we're doing right now, sort of a screen share session. Maybe you're at the Forest Service and you want to have a teleconference call or webinar with people at the BLM or the state offices, county, whatever it happens to be. And Recover was also used as a public outreach tool to talk to the general public on some of these large fires. Kind of everything's available to you at one point. And there's also print. You could set up maps right here with the print tools. And I know that this was used quite a bit last year by some of the bear teams on the Ute Park fire, as they would prepare to go do some field measurements, field sampling. They would take a couple of maps with them that they printed out of Recover, supplement the data that they had with them, and they'd head out in the field. And that I heard worked really, really well. I'm going to come over here in the last couple minutes that we have left before I open it again for question and answer, and then to turn you loose on the exercise and look at the reports. There's 11 pages to this report. This whole thing is a PDF, and you can look at whatever you want, of course. Page 1, page 2. Here we get into the detailed soils reports, broken down. This is BLM land by the soil type, Forest Service land by soil type, private land by soil type, and so on. There's the long-term NDVI monitoring from MODIS. This is the information also provided to you to support the debris flow modeling done by the USGS Landside Hazards Program. Help you interpret all of that data, as well as contact information to Dennis and Jason over there at USGS. Going to come back here, close up this report, go back to the menu. I'd like to show you real briefly the NASA Whirlwind product. So just a single click. You don't have to worry about loading your data into it. So we have collaborated with the folks at NASA Whirlwind out of NASA Ames. And what it does is this one, for the example, brought in the debris, no, I'm sorry, not the debris flow model, the DNVR for this same fire, and it displays it in the Whirlwind system. And as you can see, it's kind of a really neat looking zoom in, and you're looking at it like, well, that looks pretty darn similar to this, right? Coloration's a little bit different in the way it interpreted it, okay, but whatever, right? Now here's where it gets really cool. These are the tools that we use a lot down in this lower left corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start changing my perspective. I'm going to roll that down as if I'm on the landscape. Now I'm going to exaggerate the elevational differences a bit. Maybe roll it a little bit more. And now I can just come in here. I can zoom however I want. I can lower, zoom out, zoom in. Just do a rotate, right? I mean, I can visualize this whole thing at one time. We could give you a different layer or set of layers to view in the Whirlwind system. Use your mouse, all different. This thing does so many different, has so many different capabilities based on what you're pushing at one time. And you're going to have a chance to play with and experiment with the Whirlwind system and the recovered data being brought in to the Whirlwind system as well. This is another one of our brand new capabilities specifically done for data visualization to help you make that well-informed decision. Now, I am back to the point of asking if you have any questions.
There is actually a question. Can the URLs to the data layers be copied out of Recover and pasted into other software so we could do other analysis?
I think what you're asking for are the services, the map services, REST services. And if that's correct, yes, you definitely can. This URL here is the URL for this web map, and not specifically, you know, the Recover base layers or something like that. But that data certainly is available, no doubt about it. And if you want to get at that data, just contact me. That's one of the things that we want to add over here in our menu to make it all the easier for you. But right now, just contact me or my team over here, and we will get you those REST endpoints so you can bring that stuff into ArcGIS or other software, whatever you're looking at. And I hope I've answered that question. Any other questions? Okay, very good. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, if you have time to stay online in this webinar. Well, I got so many windows opened up. There we go. From the GIS Center's Recover page, and remember, you can get into that, you know, fairly easily by going to, I'll step it through again, just so you can see that. Go to the GIS Center, Research, Recover, and then click on Learn Recover. This is the tutorial. If you have two monitors, I will suggest that you put this on one monitor and do the actual tutorial on a second monitor. Or you could print it if that's what you like. I know I kind of like to do that because I can mark up the piece of paper so easily. But just go ahead and launch this. This is the exact same fire that we were just working with. Of course, I went over it in a fairly rapid manner, but I want to give you plenty of time to dig into it and explore hands-on what this thing can do for you. I got stuff all over the place. Okay. Well, like I said, I'll turn the floor over to the hands-on exercise time. I'll be right here if there are additional questions.